Welcome to Om Times TV, a division of Om Times Media and Broadcasting. Welcome to What is Going Om, for new thought from the edge of Om. Each week on Om Times' flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie Sedgbeer conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Om. Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. Have you ever noticed how time flies when you're fully absorbed in something you love doing, yet drags endlessly when you're anxiously waiting? Why did school years seem to stretch forever as a child, while now the months race by in a blur? Does time truly speed up and slow down? Or is it all a matter of perception, an illusion shaped by our minds and experiences? Steve Taylor, PhD, is a senior lecturer and researcher in psychology at Leeds Beckett University and the author of many best-selling books on psychology and spirituality, including The Adventure, The Leap, and Spiritual Science. A past chair of the transpersonal psychology section of the British Psychological Society, his books have been published in more than 20 languages, and he writes the popular Out of the Darkness blog for Psychology Today. Dr. Steve Taylor joins me today to discuss his latest book, Time Expansion Experiences, The Psychology of Time Perception and the Illusion of Linear Time, in which he unravels the fascinating mysteries of time, its elasticity, its illusions, and how we experience its flow in our everyday lives. Dr. Steve Taylor, welcome.
Hello, Sandie. Great to be with you.
So, 10 years ago, you had a car accident. During that, you entered a state of being where you felt time was suspended and witnessed other cars moving extremely slowly. This inspired you to conduct a qualitative study of what you call TCEs, time expansion experiences, ranging across accidents, altered states of consciousness, and spiritual states, as well as professional sport. Tell us a little bit first about your experience in that accident.
We were driving in the middle lane of a motorway just outside Manchester, where I live in England. And there was a truck on the inside lane that didn't see us. So he tried to move out into the inside lane. He clipped the back of our car. So our car started to spin round in the middle lane of the motorway. And that's as soon as, well, he actually clipped us twice. But as soon as the first crash, as soon as we heard the first crashing sound, everything went into slow motion. I remember hearing the sound, and then there was it felt like a very long pause. And I said to my wife, what was that noise? And then all of a sudden our car started to spin round, but quite slowly. It felt like it was spinning very slowly. And as you say, I looked behind and I saw the frightened faces of the other drivers behind us. I saw the long lines of cars stretching back down the motorway. It was a very, very busy afternoon on the motorway. And yeah, it was almost as if time stopped. And also my perception became very clear and very detailed. And I felt like I had a lot of time to contemplate the situation and to try to work out, if I could take any preventative action. I remember I tried to jolt the steering wheel to the left so we could turn to the hard shoulder. I tried the handbrake. And I was thinking very clearly. Also, I was incredibly calm as well. I never expected to feel so calm in a life-threatening situation. But I was thinking very calmly, this is very dangerous. We could probably get serious injuries, maybe even die in this crash. But all very, very calm. There was even a state of peaceful well-being. Also, sounds became very blurred and indistinct outside the car. But all of this, in real time, I should say, but we did manage to, maybe it was because I managed to jolt the car to the left, but we managed to spin in the direction of the hard shoulder. And we crashed into a barrier. And I remember first of all, I looked at my wife and thought, oh, she's not injured. She looks fine. Then I looked at my own body and I thought, wow, I seem to be fine too. So yeah, miraculously, we were completely unharmed, although the car was completely destroyed. And then everything went back into normal, time seemed to go back into its normal speed. I seemed to switch to a normal state of consciousness. But the whole incident, in real time, it was probably only maybe 3 or 4 seconds. But in my mind, it was much, much longer, maybe something like 40 seconds, 45 seconds. So it really made me aware of, how elastic, how flexible time is.
What kind of experience did your wife have?
Strangely, she didn't have the type of experience I had. She was very frightened. Time didn't slow down for her. I remember watching her as the car spun round, feeling very concerned because she was screaming in terror. So she didn't have that experience, strangely enough.
It would be interesting to know if, a shared experience. I know you write about shared experiences in the book. I don't think they're that common, but is it because the person who is in control of the situation, supposedly, is more likely to have that experience?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I have found many cases where passengers of cars had time expansion experiences, but I think, it does tend to be more common when a person is driving a car, for example. And there are, as you say, there are some cases where people share time expansion experiences. It all really depends on their state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because these experiences, they work through altered states of consciousness. An accident or an emergency jolts us into an altered state of consciousness. But maybe a person is not in the right frame of mind to switch into an altered state of consciousness. So it probably depends on a person's state of mind, or maybe how susceptible they are to altered states.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I'm reading the book, I'm thinking, I wonder if people's emotions have something to do with this. If somebody is an anxious person, would they switch into a calm, or, does that make a difference to the possibility of them having such an experience?
I think it does. I think in general, some people are more susceptible to different states of consciousness. Some people are closer to spiritual experiences or psychic experiences because their ego boundaries seem to be a bit softer or a bit thinner. So I think those people are probably more likely to have time expansion experiences. People with a softer ego boundary, and that probably equates with, a general state of calmness too.
So, they seem to be typical, what's going on for people, what they report is fairly typical across the board. Heightened awareness of everything, distortion in sound, sometimes lights being brighter, more vivid, nature looking more beautiful in some of them.
Yeah.
Why is that?
That's very strange because there are, I found in my research that about 50% of time expansion experiences occur in accidents, not just car accidents, but also falls and other kinds of accidents. But there are people in very kind of brutal or violent situations like car crashes. They describe it as if it's a very beautiful experiences. They describe the shards of glass when a windshield breaks, sort of floating through the air and reflecting in the sun, looking incredibly beautiful. And I think it comes from an altered state of consciousness. Our normal human state, in our normal state of consciousness, we're not really primed to see beauty. We're primed to be in a practical mode, to focus on our day-to-day activities, to do our jobs and to, deal with the business of day-to-day life. So, and we live in familiar surroundings that we don't normally pay that much attention to. So we don't, we're not really primed for beauty. But when we switch into an altered state of consciousness, it's as if a veil falls away from the familiar world. Everything around us looks new and fresh and also beautiful.
What you're describing, someone being right in the now. We have a shock, maybe we trip, we have a car accident. We are present. We are fully present. Our attention is right here. And I wonder whether it's being in that now moment where people say quite often that time doesn't exist.
That's definitely a factor. Yeah, I think that's related to what you could call the normal chattering mind. We have this sort of associational chatter that runs through our minds a lot of the time that makes us think about the future, that makes us recall the past or daydream about things that may or not happen, or just sort of snippets of conversation or songs. And that we get lost in that associational chatter a lot of the time. So that makes us absent, as opposed to present, because if you're caught up in this kind of fog of mental chatter, you're not really in the now. But when you have an accident, or it could be any kind of emergency situation, when you're told some dramatic news, or it could even be a powerful spiritual experience of communion with nature or communion with another person, it takes you out of that fog of mental chatter, and suddenly you're right here. You're right. You're part of your surroundings, and everything looks beautiful and real, and it's a beautiful experience of presence.
And these are real experiences. They're not, illusions. They're not, false memories. They're not. They are real.
Definitely. I mean, there is a theory which I speak about in the book, that these experiences are caused by memory, and they're a kind of an illusion of recollection. And that the theory is that when we're in dramatic situations, we're full of adrenaline. We become our brains become very alert and process a lot of information. So that when we look back at those experiences from the next day or maybe a few weeks later, we have a lot of memories. All of that information creates a lot of memories. So we have the impression that all of those memories have stretched time. So it seems like the experience lasted for a long time. But I think that's nonsense, because, I did a survey a while ago of 300 people who'd had TEEs. And I asked them whether they felt it was a real experience in the now, or whether it could be an illusion of memory, looking back from the future. And only 3% of them said it could have been an illusion of memory. Everybody else, apart from there were about 10% of people who weren't sure, but everybody else was convinced that it was a real experience in the now. Part of the reason for that is that so many people feel that they are able to take preventative action during the experience that would be impossible if time was running at a normal speed. Just like me in the car crash, I felt as though I was able to try out lots of things and to think very methodically and in a very detailed way about the situation. And it wouldn't have been possible if time had been going at its normal speed. So a lot of people actually say that they felt that they saved their lives. They were able to save their lives because of this time expansion.
People who have NDEs, and I know you've researched those too, often say it's changed them. It's changed them in so many ways, their emotions, psychologically, possibly even their personality. Do you know whether these kinds of, TEEs cause changes in people?
They do, to a degree, maybe not as dramatically as near-death experiences. Although, time expansion and time cessation also occurs in near-death experiences. But in the kind of accident-related TEEs, people do say that they have a different view of themselves. Mine was a bit like that, because, as I said before, I never expected to feel so calm in a life-threatening situation. It made me think that, if when bad things happen, when I am in danger, I will be able to cope. Something inside me will rise and deal with the danger. So I always secretly suspected that I might sort of cave in dangerous situations, but in reality, I'm sure now that I would deal with those situations quite competently and confidently. And a lot of people said the same thing. They said that they had a more positive view of themselves, but also they had a more positive view of life in general, because they were, a lot of them felt that they were on the verge of death, even that they had glimpsed death, and they were sure that there was nothing to be afraid of. They felt this amazing sense of well-being, this amazing sense of calm positivity, and it took away their fear of death. They were sure that when they face death again, they will return to that state of calm well-being.
So that's an interesting point there, because if somebody has, which in a way is like a near-death experience, I've just forgotten what I was going to say there. Something about comparing the near-death experience with your experience.
Mhm.
It'll come back to me. Let's tell me about tell me about TCEs. I think I had a momentary loss of time.
Yeah, a moment of timelessness.
Yeah. Tell me about TCEs. What is the difference there?
Well, time expansion experiences are pretty common. I found in my research that about 75% of people have had at least one TEE, whether it was in an accident or while playing sports or while, after ingesting a psychedelic substance of some form or a spiritual experience of some form. But TCs, as I call them, time cessation experiences, are much more rare. They only really occur in two different states. One is in near-death experiences. So a lot of people, when they have a near-death experience, not just in the sense of coming close to death, but in the sense of actually dying for a short time before being resuscitated, and having the archetypal out-of-body experience and the journey through darkness to a place of light, meeting deceased relatives or beings of light and so forth. That kind of near-death experience. People often say that, some people say that time expanded radically, so that they went through an incredibly complex series of experiences in a few seconds. They went through hours and hours or days of experiences in the matter of a few seconds. But other people say that time just didn't exist. There was no time. In some way, the past and the future were here now, in the present, as if time had become a kind of panorama, with no distinction between the past and present.
Yeah. I know what I was going to say about the near-death experience. It was the life review.
Oh, yeah.
Having this accident, you don't know if you're going to survive. How many people in that situation have a life review?
Well, life reviews, they do only tend to happen when a person is really close to death, when they really skirt the edges of life and death, and also if they have a near-death experience and they do die for a short time before being resuscitated. About a third of near-death experiences feature life reviews, and I would say that a similar figure for like in life-threatening situations, maybe between a third and a half of people have life reviews. And often, a good example is mountaineers who fall off the side of a mountain, for example. It's very common for them to have life reviews because at least in their minds, it's almost certain that they're going to die, but fortuitously they manage to survive. And in that space of a few seconds before they hit the ground, they recall or relive sometimes every experience of their whole lives from birth to the present moment. So that's in some ways, that's the most radical time expansion of all, living through a whole lifetime of experiences in the matter of a few seconds.
So you said that sometimes it's possible to glimpse past and future experiences. Do you think this is an explanation for precognition, or there are other ways that people fall into those precognitive states, etc.?
Well, I'm certain that precognition exists. I've had precognitive experiences myself, as I mentioned in the book. And there are so many, really strange and miraculous experiences of precognition, which are very well documented. Certain people who are able to glimpse disasters and describe them and draw them in intricate detail before they happen. And also that there are lots of scientific experiments in laboratory environments which show that precognition exists. So yeah, if precognition exists, we need to consider what it tells us about reality, and if the life review is a real phenomenon. Some scientists obviously are skeptical and they try to explain the life review in some sort of unusual brain activity. They sometimes say that there's an unloading of memories when we're in situations of great stress or close to death. But those experiences don't work partly because the life review is not just about memories. It's really nothing to do with memory. It's an actual reliving of experiences.
Yeah.
People often say that they relive these experiences in extraordinary detail. They notice things that they weren't aware of at the time when they originally experienced these things. They see events from multiple perspectives in a kind of telepathic in a telepathic way. They can sense other people's responses to events that happened 30 years ago originally. So these things are real, and we need to consider what they tell us about time. So obviously they suggest that in some way the future already exists because we're able to glimpse it, and the
Yes.
past still exists because we're able to re-experience it.
Yeah.
So that suggests that time is like a panorama, that really there is no division between the past,
Yeah.
present, and future.
There's that fascinating story about the guy with the who's the musician.
Oh
He
yeah,
saw a future in which he was a jazz musician, and so he became one.
yeah, that's right. There was a guy called Tony Coffey, who is a really successful jazz musician here in the UK,
Yeah.
but he wasn't from a musical family, and he was He was working as an apprentice roofer at the age of 16 when he fell off the roof of a 3-story building. And in those 2 or 3 seconds before he hit the ground, he had visions of himself playing this instrument. He didn't even know what it was. It was a saxophone, but he'd never seen one. He didn't know what it was. And he had visions of he didn't know it was his future, but he had visions of himself in different places with different people, with children, with a woman. But he was obviously very seriously injured. He was in hospital for a few weeks. But this image of himself playing the instrument kept coming back into his mind. And he felt impelled to find out more about it and to get hold of this instrument, which he found out was a saxophone. And he felt impelled to play it. He couldn't get a place at music college here in the UK because he had no qualifications in music. So he had to go to America. He did a sort of crowdfunding campaign to go to America to study at the Berklee College of Music. And he became, a really successful and prominent jazz musician. And later, he realized that he was visiting the places he'd seen in his vision, and he married the woman, and he had the children that he saw in his vision.
Astonishing. Have you read P.M.H. Atwater's book, Future Memory?
No, I haven't.
She had 3 near-death experiences, and she was told she had to write one book for each of them. One of those books was Future Memory. And I mean, just astonishing experiences. She met, she'd be at work and suddenly her hands would look different, and she'd go into these, I guess, altered states, and she would be seeing the future. Now, is that something that we would put in the same category as this? Maybe, maybe not.
I think so.
Who knows what happened, as a result of those 3 near-death experiences? What may have opened up within her that was closed before?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think it's these experiences they're obviously not so common because not so many people have near-death experiences. But when people do have near-death experiences, they often do have visions of the future.
Yeah.
The story of Elizabeth Crone, which I mentioned in the book.
Yes.
When she was struck by lightning and had a near-death experience.
Yeah.
But she felt, like a lot of people who have NDEs, she was told that she had a choice about whether to return or whether to remain in this place of peace. And she had young children, so she obviously decided to go back. But she was told that if she went back, her marriage would not survive, and she would have another child, and everything, and she also had visions of future world events too. And like many people, she also retained her precognitive powers, so she continued to have visions of disasters and other world events.
One story that intrigued me, and I've actually seen this woman in a Netflix documentary series, the American Mary Neal, who, the American orthopedic spine surgeon, and her experience of being trapped in that waterfall for 12 minutes. I mean, there's more than just one thing going on there. There's more than a TEE because her body responded physically. Anyone else would have died.
Amazing, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another thing. I mean, this relates to another of my books called Extraordinary Awakenings, when I write about people who've gone through real extremes of deprivation. Like, for example, there was a study of people who had survived the gulags in Soviet Russia, where they were living in really brutal circumstances, temperatures of -30, starvation diets, torture and brutality. But a lot of people, when they were just completely broken down, seemingly completely broken down, they would find this, they would discover, they called it soul power. They would discover this kind of radiance inside them that kept them alive. And it gave them physical warmth. It gave them energy, to sustain them. And yeah, there's something miraculous about it. But I think we do have these miraculous abilities inside us, but often they only show themselves in really extreme situations.
Yeah, yeah. You wrote quite a bit about sports people, athletes, etc. There was the story about Edward Hall. That I think Edward Hall wrote a book about somebody, the pilot, who did all these amazing things in a few seconds to save the plane. And there was a tennis player that you wrote about
Yeah,
whose,
Jimmy Connors.
whose focus became so incredibly sharp. But you talk about certain sports people, and you mentioned Messi, and how they seem to have an ability to fall into that kind of state quite easily, and almost as if their boundaries between this state and whatever that state is are very thin. It reminded me, you mentioned that they seem to have other problems. There's addiction, or some of these people, like Messi, seem to have neurodiversity of some kind. There's
Yeah,
a lot of, I've noticed with autistic children, and I've been around a few, that their perception is very precise. I was walking
yeah.
along with my grandson once, and he was telling me something about what he saw in the through the window of a building that we'd passed, and I didn't even notice the building, but he
Mm,
was telling me in exact detail. So
mm,
I wonder whether there is something to be explored there. People
mm.
who have this, what did you call it? This uh, liminal,
Yeah, transliminal.
transliminal. Yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like there might be. I wonder if there's a connection there
Mm,
with that, their brains and their ability to fall very easily into that state of focus.
definitely. Yeah, these people, the high level sports people, and we're talking about the most, the very best
The
at the
elite.
very highest level, beyond what we normally consider great, great feats of athleticity and sport.
Yeah.
The most elite of the elite sports people. They do seem to be what you could say neuroatypical. They're not normal people, and I think the key to it is they have the ability to shift into an altered state of consciousness in which time goes very slowly, and their perception does become very acute. And if you look at Lionel Messi, you know, other people have put forward the theory that time goes slowly for him because he seems so graceful. He does very complex athletic feats very quickly.
Mm,
And all of these other players are kind of lunging at him, but unable to touch him. He's so graceful and he avoids all
yeah,
their lunging feet. And
yeah.
he has this ability to sort of, guide the ball with perfect accuracy. It all seems very slow and graceful. And, he is definitely an unusual person. Some people have suggested that he is autistic. Yeah, I think somebody like him, he does have very, very soft boundaries, very soft ego boundaries. So I think he finds it very easy to shift into that altered state of consciousness. Yeah, and that perhaps that does explain why not just sports people, but a lot of geniuses can be quite troubled people, and they have very soft ego boundaries,
Yes.
which is great. It's the key to spiritual experiences. It's the key
Yeah.
to psychic experiences. But if you're not careful, it leads to, it also brings vulnerability to, disturbances or instability.
Mm. So, what are these stories, these experiences tell us about consciousness and the human mind?
They tell us that what we assume to be normal consciousness is actually subnormal. We kind of take the state that we experience most of the time. We assume that it's kind of objective and normal and real. And we assume that the view it gives us of reality is real, and it's the common sense, the so-called common sense view of reality that tells us that unusual phenomena cannot exist. Everything is very orderly and very boring. But when we shift into time expansion experiences or other unusual states of consciousness, like spiritual experiences, then we know it's like sort of slipping into a more real reality. It's like a veil falls away, and suddenly it's like, this is the way things really are. We don't normally live. The world is not really as we normally perceive it. There's actually a more real world behind it, and it's a pleasant world. It's a world that feels more comfortable, more harmonious, looks more beautiful. And once we've had these experiences, we know that is the more real place. We feel very strongly that normal reality and normal consciousness are subnormal. And sometimes, occasionally, that brings a sense of frustration because we're stuck in this kind of dull, badly furnished room where we could be outside in this beautiful, spacious, harmonious, landscape. But usually, it brings a more optimistic and trusting view of reality and a desire to return to that place. So a lot of people start to meditate or follow other spiritual practices because they want to get back there. And then they know intuitively that it is there and they can get back there.
Yeah, and also, people who, goodness, I'm having problems with time here. I'm going to go for a break. You're listening to What is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and my guest today is senior lecturer and researcher in psychology at Leeds Beckett University and best-selling author Steve Taylor, PhD. And we're discussing his latest book, Time Expansion Experiences, The Psychology of Time Perception and the Illusion of Linear Time. Still to come, can we consciously control our experience of time? And is it possible to live our lives on the basis that linear time is an illusion? Stay tuned. Hello, I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, host of Times flagship radio show, What is Going On? And as an author, editor and 13 times book judge who's read thousands of books and interviewed hundreds of authors, I'm constantly asked what's really worth reading and what's not. So I created the No BS Spiritual Book Club to help you save time and money by picking the brains of discerning names who've walked this path before you. There's no catch, no fees and no BS, just an ever-growing library of 10 best spiritual book lists from some of your favourite authors and teachers, plus free book excerpts, audios and video interviews with people like Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., David G., Lee Harris, Mark Nepo and more. From well-known classics to hidden gems you've never heard of, it's the only no BS guide to the best spiritual books to enlighten your journey of self-discovery. So why not join the club? Get inspired and save money at the nobsspiritualbookclub.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner. Through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene Keys is basically the code book of life. In the Gene Keys, the book is made up of these 3 levels: shadows, gifts, and siddhis. And the journey is through those 3 levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the Siddhi. And the Siddhis are very exalted words, and it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey, and the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back, Steve Taylor. In
Thanks.
your section on beyond linear time, you explore negative transliminal states like schizophrenia and dementia, which involved disrupted time perception. Tell me a little bit about that.
One of the, nowadays, schizophrenia is often described as a temporal disorder. So, in other words, the essential issue in schizophrenia is a lack of awareness of time and a lack of control of time. And usually for people with schizophrenia, time goes incredibly slowly because they're in a state of distress or anxiety. Negative states of mind can really stretch time, and that happens a lot in schizophrenia. And also, because people don't have control of time, they feel overwhelmed by it. They can't really judge how long events last. They can't estimate time. They can't really plan for the future. So they're lost in a world of timelessness, if you like. So in a way, that is paradoxically similar to the timelessness which spiritual development can bring, the sense of transcending time. But it's a very negative experience because, people with schizophrenia, they don't have a sense of stability within their own psyche. So they're completely overwhelmed by this world of timelessness. Whereas if a person is in a spiritual state, they're very stable, and they feel very comfortable. So they feel very peaceful. They feel very at home in this world of timelessness. And it's similar with dementia. I mean, dementia, I quote from one psychologist who says that the essential issue with dementia is similar. It's about not living in the present, not being able to be in the present, because your mind is pulling you back into the past, usually back into the past. And if you meet people with dementia, they often, it seems almost as if they're reliving past experiences. They seem to be back in their childhood, talking to their mother again. And I don't think that's just memory. I think maybe in a sense they are actually there again. But again, because they're in a state of distress and instability and disturbance, it's a very negative experience, completely different to the sense of timelessness that we may have in, a life review or when we have precognitive experiences.
So what about time jumping? I mean, there are books written about people who literally, or say they literally jumped from one space and time into something else.
You mean like time slips when we go back to a past
I guess
experience?
time slips. I don't know if you've read any of Cynthia Sue Larson's books. I mean, she's
No.
written one on time jumping. She has a website called something realities, reality shifts, and she's got a newsletter that she's been running for years, and it's full of people's stories. They send her all these stories, about these experiences they had with alternate realities through things like time jumping.
Yeah.
Have you come across that?
I've come across time slips in which people return to previous events in their lives. And I think they're actually quite common, but I think in some cases people confuse them with normal memory. They think, oh, that must be just a memory, but they did actually return to an early part of their lives. I think, these experiences don't surprise me because I do think that linear time is an illusion. I think the past does still exist and the future already exists. And the same applies to, well, time is basically like space. In the same way that we can move to different places in the world, we can move to different places in time, but only usually in certain states of consciousness, in altered states of consciousness. One of the features of our normal state of consciousness is that it imprisons us in linear time. It shields us from the past and the future. But as soon as we shift into an altered state, then, often we have access to these different times.
Well, I remember somebody talking about time travel, and they said, every time you remember something, you're time traveling. Now, I make a point, if I'm having a wonderful experience, I make a point of reminding myself, I'm going to remember this. I'm going to take a snapshot of it. And I can go back and revisit that. And for those moments, I'm there. I'm not.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I often have people sometimes refer to this as retrocognition. Precognition goes into the future. Retrocognition returns to the past. I often have an experience when I'm floating between sleep and wakefulness. Sometimes in the afternoon, if I'm feeling a bit lazy, I'll go for a doze for an hour or two. And I just hover between sleep and wakefulness. And I sometimes often return to earlier periods of my life. And it's not just a memory. I feel like I'm there. I'm back in the flat I lived in 20 years ago in Singapore. I'm back in, the flat I lived in London 30 years ago. I'm really there. I can really feel the atmosphere of those times. I can feel the places where I used to live. I got the sense of smell and the feeling, of how I was, where I was in my life at that time. So I feel like I do actually return there. And, and as I say, I think those experiences are quite common.
So let's talk about how some of this actually works. I mean, if we... really, really interesting how we're talking about time.
You're slipping out of linear time.
I'm slipping in and out of it all the time. So one of the things that I really loved, you gave an answer to, this is a question that's bothered me all my life. Why is it that when I go on holiday, that first week is wonderfully slow, and the second week or the third, if it's a 3-week trip, goes by in a flash? And you answered that. So tell us what is happening when we are having these, we think that time is speeding up, we think it's slowing down.
This is because of the relationship between information processing and time perception. Basically, the more information we process in our minds and our awareness, the slower time goes. And information processing is a bit of a fancy word, but it basically means perceptions and impressions and experiences. So the more perceptions, the more experiences we have, the more information we take in, the more time is stretched. So that's one of the main reasons why time goes so slowly for children, because children live in a world of newness. Everything is fresh. They're experiencing everything or a lot of things for the first time. And children have this amazingly vivid perception too. Everything is sort of hyper real to them. So all of that stretches time. And so when we go on holiday, it's a bit like returning to the childhood state, at least for the first week, because it's all so fresh and new and interesting and exciting. But by the second week, you're already getting used to it. It's already becoming a bit familiar, and so you're not processing as much information, which is why it seems to go faster.
So then, you think about children, for example, and they are always in the now. The little ones, they're always in the now. They don't seem to know anything else. So if I want to change, if I want time to slow down, then instead of doing the things that I'm always doing, I should go out seeking new experiences.
That's definitely one method. Yeah, and it works really well. Travel is a great way of expanding time. I use this analogy in the book of two twins. Imagine there's one twin who leaves school at the age of, let's say, 16, gets a job in an office, and spends her whole life working in the same job in the same town where she was born. But there's another twin who is more kind of adventurous, And she leaves school and decides to go traveling around the world, spends a couple of years in Australia and a few years in other countries and doing lots of different jobs, having loads of experiences. So assuming those two twins passed away on the same day in the future, the second twin would actually live through a lot more time. Her life would actually be longer. She would actually experience a lot more time in her life. Whereas the first twin, her life is full of repetition and routine, familiarity, all of which, constricts time, makes time pass very quickly. So we can do that. We can try to not just travel, but also new ideas, new hobbies, new people, being curious and open to our experience, making sure that, even something as simple as you don't have to take the same route to work every day. You can travel a different way. You don't have to go to the same place on holiday every year. You can go somewhere else. You don't have to do the same things at the weekend. But even more fundamentally, it's about our perception. There's actually research showing that mindfulness and meditation generally can slow down time. And I think that's mainly because meditation opens our awareness. It makes us present. It makes us consciously aware of what we're doing and of our surroundings. So our minds are always taking in newness. Even if we're in familiar places, our awareness is so fresh that we're taking in newness. So that stretches time.
Yeah, you referenced a guy called Mike Hall, the sports coach, who could enter, this kind of place where time doesn't exist for him at will after 12 years of Tai Chi practice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Well, and that amazing. But I think in Eastern martial arts, Asian martial arts, there are some martial arts like Aikido or karate where people do try to cultivate what they call it machine, a state of empty mind, no mind, in which time slows down. They try to consciously cultivate time expansion as an aid, for their martial art. And many people comment that they are able to do this. So it's really about meditation. They get themselves into a state of deep meditation in which their minds are empty, and as a result, they can slow down time.
So you can do that with an empty mind, and you can also slow down time and use it to accomplish so much more. Like the guy who, did all of those, the pilot who did all of those maneuvers, which took him 45 minutes to describe, but he did them in seconds.
That's right. It would be wonderful if this is one of the things I suggest in the book, if emergency workers could cultivate time expansion.
Well, yes.
But it's not impossible. As I said before, as we were discussing before, athletes can do this. They do it unconsciously. They just learn the habit of switching into an altered state of consciousness in which time slows down. People in martial arts do it. Generally, it's it seems to be the result of meditation. So it is possible.
I mean, I've always wondered how surgeons, who are doing like 16-hour surgery, how on earth are they, what is happening there? They must be in some kind of zone. I mean, I know, when I write, if I'm writing anything extensive, and you probably know this too, you can sit there and you can turn out, 10,000 words, and it feels like you've only been sitting there for an hour.
That's right. Yeah, it's like a kind of time hole, or a wormhole. So that's sort of passing through a gateway. I mean, I do experience that. And it's usually when my mind it starts off very, very focused. And then it switches into this state of ease, a state of calm ease, in which I continue to be very focused, but in a very calm way. And it is almost as if I slip into this place where time goes slowly and I'm able to accomplish a lot in a short space of time. I think musicians experience it too. I think musicians sometimes experience it. There are some classical piano pieces, for example, which are so complex. This kind of endless cascade of notes flowing by at 100 miles an hour. And I've heard from pianists who say that the only way to play these pieces is to slow down time. Otherwise, it would be impossible.
Yeah. So this tells us that there's a lot more research that needs to be done. because there are so many questions that we can't answer at the moment, haven't been able to answer.
Yeah,
Are you going to do it?
hopefully. But I mean, I think there are some things that human beings can't understand. We can't really understand near-death experiences. At least in our present state, we can't really understand them. Maybe we'll understand them when we pass over into a different realm. But I'm quite comfortable with the fact that there are so many things we can't explain. It's a bit like quantum physics. I talk about quantum physics in the book, and there are so many things in quantum physics which don't make any sense at all, which are really impossible to understand. There was one well-known physicist, I think it's a guy called Richard Feynman, an American physicist, and he said, if you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. It doesn't make any sense. But I think that's, our normal consciousness is limited. Our awareness is limited. Our intellect is limited. There are some things that are beyond our awareness and beyond our understanding. And that's great. It brings mystery and magic to life.
Yeah, absolutely. The Richard Bartlett, who used to do matrix energetics, he used to teach people how they can 2-point. Somehow they're connecting 2 points and they're skipping in time. And I tried that and it never worked for me. But I do remember once driving from Las Vegas to Phoenix, and I knew how long that journey took because I'd done it several times, and getting caught on a narrow road because there was an accident and they had to bring in a helicopter. And I remember sitting on that narrow road for about an hour and a half. And yet I still made it back in the same time that I always did. And I could never work out how I'd done that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Maybe similar to Formula One drivers who they report, time expansion and unusual. There's quite a strong connection between motor racing and altered states of consciousness. Get such an extreme.
I thought it was just boredom or something. I don't know.
Maybe, but you probably shifted into a different state of consciousness.
Yeah, very likely. So let me ask you before we close, is it possible to live our lives? This is a question that you pose in the book on the basis that linear time is an illusion. What will life be like? What will we do?
Well, we have to live in time in order to function in the world, in order to deal with day-to-day life, to deal with the practical stuff and bring up our families and drive our cars and do our jobs. So, it wouldn't be helpful to live completely out of time. There needs to be a part of us which is functioning in the world. But at the same time as focusing on the practical stuff, we can sense timelessness. I use the analogy in the book of it's as if we're walking in a straight line along the beach, and we can see the ocean to our side, but we can actually step into the ocean as well. We can walk along the beach at the same time as stepping in the ocean. So we can live in a straight line at the same time as being aware of this ocean of timelessness around us. And it's about really having control. When we have moments of quietness, when we have moments of relaxation, we can turn our attention to the essential timelessness of the world. We can experience it, and we can, to a certain degree, control our experience of time. We can slow down time if we like. We can even speed up time if we like. And in certain states of consciousness, we can glimpse the future or re-experience the past. So all of this makes life much more interesting, much richer. To be imprisoned in linear time is very frustrating. It brings a lot of suffering. There are so many pessimistic philosophers, so many pessimistic poets who are complaining about time eating us away and leading us to death. And there's no escape from this arrow of time, which is eating up our lives and leading us to eternal darkness. And it's all the kind of suffering that comes from that straight line of linear time. But as soon as you realize that that's not the whole story, there is this ocean of timelessness all around us. It makes life richer, but also much easier. It means that we can relax. We don't feel oppressed by time. And, it makes living in the present a beautiful experience.
So, how has all this research changed you?
Partly in that way, because I used to feel oppressed by time. I used to feel that life was short and time was running out. The clock was continually running down. So I felt this kind of anxiety. I've got to do everything I need to do while there's still time, you know. And in a more general way, I felt that there wasn't enough time in my life, that I wasn't meeting my deadlines. I needed to accomplish more. But now I don't feel like that. I think this is probably a general effect of my years of meditation as well, and my sort of spiritual development. But I don't feel oppressed by time. I feel that there is more than enough time around in my life. And I don't tend to worry about deadlines. I don't worry about not meeting deadlines, which makes my publishers quite angry. But yeah, generally, I do feel that there is this ocean of timelessness around me. And it gives me a feeling of comfort and trust.
Well, thank you for this book. I mean, it's been a real eye-opener for me, and it's answered so many questions that I've been pondering for years.
Brilliant.
So thank you, Steve. Thank you for joining us today. Tell us what people will find at your website. I know it's stephenmtaylor.com, and it's Stephen with a V. What will they find there?
Yep, it's stephenmtaylor.com. People will find information about my online events and talks and my latest writings. I think I've written 16 books now, so you'll find out about all the books on my website. And I also have poems and various articles there too, and my social links to my social media accounts.
Yeah, and people can also catch up with your blog posts on Psychology Today.
That's right. And also people can write to me. I'm always interested in collecting people's time expansion or time cessation experiences. So if people want to write to me to share their experiences, there's a link on my website, and I'll be really grateful to receive them.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
That's
Sandie.
it for today. We're out of time.
It's an illusion.
Thanks, Sandie Sedgbeer. And I'll be back at the same time next week with another edition of What is Going On. Till then, it's goodbye from me, and thank you to Steve Taylor.
Thank you.